The cold wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the dry leaves around my boots. I stood beneath a gray sky, gripping the sides of my long black coat, watching as they lowered Aldrich's casket into the frozen ground. My heart felt numb. 42 years of marriage, gone with a single heart attack. Around me, mourners bowed their heads, most of them unfamiliar faces, colleagues from his engineering firm, neighbors from years ago. My son, Matej, stood across the grave. His arm was tightly wrapped around his wife, Clara, who looked untouched by sorrow. She wore pearl earrings and a coat too white for a funeral. I looked at Matej, hoping for some connection, some warmth. But when our eyes met, his expression remained blank. No flicker of recognition. No grief shared. Just distance. After the service, as people began to scatter, I tried to approach him. "Matej," I whispered, placing my hand gently on his sleeve. "Can we talk?" He pulled away like I had burned him. "Now's not the time, Mum." Clara leaned in and whispered something in his ear. His jaw tensed. Then he turned to me and said, too loudly for the setting, "This isn't your place anymore." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're not part of this family now." "Not really." It felt like the ground opened beneath me. The words echoed in my ears. "Not part of this family." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. Instead, I looked at Clara. Her lips curled slightly, just enough for me to see it wasn't grief on her face. It was triumph. "We'll handle things from here," Matej added. A lump caught in my throat. I felt like a ghost at my own husband's funeral. I turned to leave, but something inside me froze. I had nowhere else to go. Later that evening, I returned to our flat in Zizkov, the one Aldrich and I had shared for most of our lives. The lights were off. I reached into my bag for my keys. When I pushed one into the lock, it didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. A light came on inside. Then footsteps. The door opened, just a crack. "Mom," said Matej, blocking the entrance. "You shouldn't be here. This is my home." It was. He reached into his coat pocket and held up a ring of keys. My keys. The ones I had always left on the kitchen hook. "I changed the locks," he said simply. My throat tightened. "Why?" "It's for the best. You'll get your things. In time." Before I could reply, the door shut. I was left alone in the corridor, still in my funeral dress, holding my handbag like a stranger in her own life. I walked out into the cold night, past the tram stop, not sure where I was going. The city lights blurred with the tears in my eyes. My chest hurt more than it had at the cemetery. He had shut the door on me, on his own mother. I had buried my husband that morning, and by nightfall, my son had buried me too. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I ended up in a small pension on the edge of the city, near the river. The room was narrow and cold, with a single bed and a wooden chair by the window. It smelled of old linens and cheap soap. I sat there, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my only child, had locked me out of the life I helped build. I wanted to call someone. But who? Aldrich was gone. My sisters lived hours away and had never liked Prague. The neighbors from our building? They barely nodded at me in the hallway. I had always made myself small, the quiet wife of a respected engineer. My whole world had been my husband and my son. Now one was dead, and the other had cut me off. The next morning, I went to the bank. I needed access to our savings. The clerk looked at my name, then frowned. "I'm sorry, Madame Dvorkova. This joint account has been transferred. It now only lists Matej Dvorak." "That cannot be right." She tilted her screen away and nodded politely. "It was changed 3 days ago. 3 days ago. That meant before the funeral." My hands trembled as I walked out. Then I remembered something. The cottage in Melnik. The one Aldrich and I had bought decades ago, the one we barely used. I still had the title in my name. That afternoon, I took the train north. It had been years since I had visited. The garden was overgrown, the shutters falling off, but it was mine. I turned the key. It still worked. Inside was dust and silence. I opened the windows. The air smelled like memory. I sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, staring at the cobwebs in the corner and the faded wallpaper. I was not broken. Not yet. The days passed slowly. I swept the floor, scrubbed the tiles, lit the old iron stove. My body ached at night, but the silence gave me time to think. The more I reflected, the more I realized that Clara had always been circling, waiting. Subtle at first. A shift in tone when I spoke. A sideways glance when I hugged Matei too long. One night, I found a box of old letters in the cottage attic. Among them were birthday cards I had sent Matei during his university years. Each one was opened but never responded to. Had I always been invisible to him? Or had Clara taught him to stop seeing me? I took long walks through the countryside. The neighbors were distant but polite. One elderly man, Joseph, saw me outside the shop and gave a slight nod. "You're back," he said. "For a while." He looked me up and down. "They say your son's wife is clever. Some say too clever." I said nothing, but inside, a small flame flickered. 2 weeks later, I returned to Prague. Not to confront Matei, not yet, but to visit the solicitor. The office was in a pale yellow building near Vinohrady. Inside, it smelled of paper and polished wood. The solicitor, a quiet man with round glasses, greeted me without surprise. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. "I want to understand what happened to the will." He opened a folder, slid a document towards me. "This is the final version, signed by your husband a month before his death. It leaves everything to his son, with a clause that passes the cottage in Melnik to you." Why would Aldrich do that? He would never cut me out. The solicitor looked uncomfortable. "According to this, you agreed to it. There is a signature." I leaned forward. My name was there, in neat, slanted letters. But I had never signed it. Back at the cottage, I pulled out every document I had ever signed. Letters, bank slips, holiday forms. I compared the signatures. Mine had a sharp hook on the V. The one in the will was too smooth, too clean. I took photos. I sent them to a handwriting expert whose contact I found through Joseph's niece. A week later, he responded, "Madame Dvorkova, the signature on the will is not consistent with your natural hand. It appears to be copied or traced." My breath caught. I had been erased on paper, as I had been in person. I needed proof. Not suspicion. Not anger. I returned to the building in Zizkov. I watched from across the street as Matei and Clara stepped into a taxi, dressed for dinner. I approached the caretaker, an old man named Pavel. He squinted at me. "I remember you. Your husband died, yes?" "Yes." "I need to ask something." He scratched his beard. "Your son had someone come here a month ago. Some woman with documents. She asked about you. If you still lived here." "Did she leave a name?" "No. But she had a voice like ice." "Clara." I asked if anyone had used the building scanner recently. Pavel shrugged, then said, "The security camera might still have the footage. The tapes are old, but sometimes they hold ghosts." With Joseph's help, I got the old footage converted. It took days. Grainy frames. Fuzzy sound. But then I saw her. Clara. Standing at the front door, speaking to someone just off camera. She held a folder, smiled, slipped something into the caretaker's hand. The date was marked 3 weeks before Aldrich's death. I showed it to the solicitor. His expression changed. "If what you're suggesting is true, this would void the will entirely. But I need more. Something solid." He nodded. "If she forged your signature, she may have done it elsewhere. Banks, hospitals. Find the thread, and the fabric will tear." I remembered something. Aldrich had once told me he kept a backup will, locked in a metal box, buried behind his workshop in Melnik. That night, I took a spade and a torch and went into the garden. The soil was hard. The roots clawed at me. But after an hour of digging, I hit something. The box. Rusted but whole. Inside, a will. Dated 6 months earlier. Leaving half of everything to me. I took it straight to the solicitor. This changes everything." He prepared a file for investigation. And just like that, Clara's carefully spun world began to unravel. 3 weeks passed. I returned to Prague, this time not as a beggar, but with a solicitor at my side. The court froze all assets pending review. Matej did not answer my calls. I went to the house in Zizkov once more. The key no longer worked. But I stood at the door, staring at the place I had once called home. Pavel the caretaker came down the stairs and said softly, "Your son moved out last week." Said something about needing a fresh start. The house was silent. Empty. But it was mine again. I walked inside. It smelled of lavender and fresh paint. But beneath it, I could still feel the shadow of betrayal. I now live between the cottage and the flat in Zizkov. I keep the doors open. I let the light in. Matej has not contacted me. Not since the documents were exposed. Clara disappeared from the city entirely. Sometimes I still dream of Oldrich, of his laughter in the kitchen, his hand on mine. I wonder what he would have said. I think he knew. That is why he hid the real will. That is why he left me the one place no one could touch. I do not seek revenge. I only wanted my truth to be known. And now it is.